I stood on my front porch, my hands wrapped around a warm coffee mug, its heat seeping into my fingers as I gazed out at the little patch of earth I had spent years transforming. My garden, my sanctuary, flourished with vibrant roses, delicate tulips, and cheerful daisies, each bloom a testament to the quiet peace I had carved out for myself in this sleepy Illinois town. It wasn't grand, but it was mine, a place where the world felt gentle again after everything had fallen apart. The divorce had been ugly, a slow, bitter unraveling of a life I had once thought unshakable. Clarissa had taken her share, and then some, walking out the door with half of everything I had worked for. But she couldn't take this small, beautiful refuge where I had rebuilt myself one flower at a time. Here, it was just me and the earth beneath my hands, growing something good out of the wreckage. That peace lasted until the day the moving truck rumbled down my street and came to a stop 3 houses away. At first, I thought nothing of it. Just another family settling into their new home, looking for the same quiet life I had found. Then she stepped out. Clarissa. The breath caught in my chest as she emerged from the passenger side, tossing her hair the way she always did when she wanted to feel important. A cruel joke from the universe, planting her right here in my cul-de-sac, as if I hadn't already endured enough. And then came the man beside her. I didn't know his name yet, but everything about him grated against me instantly. Broad shoulders, a buzz cut, and the kind of presence that demanded attention without a single word. His truck was massive, all chrome and arrogance, the kind built to be loud and impossible to ignore. I watched them unload their things, hoping, praying they would keep to themselves. Hope, however, is fragile, and reality has a way of shattering it. A few days later, I was out watering my flowers when I heard the deep growl of that truck's engine. I looked up just in time to see him backing out, cutting the corner too sharply, his tires sinking into the edge of my lawn. Deep ruts carved through the grass, dark wounds on the green the first had tended so carefully. I froze, coffee spilling over my fingers, my jaw tightening. It wasn't the garden, not yet, just the grass. But it felt like a warning. And then it happened again. And again. Every week, like clockwork, his truck veered into my yard, chewing through the earth, leaving deep scars I had to mend. I gritted my teeth, told myself it wasn't worth a fight. Until the morning he didn't just graze the lawn, he destroyed everything. I was crouched in the dirt, planting fresh marigolds, when I felt the familiar tremor of that engine. Before I could rise, the front tires plowed through my garden. The tulips flattened, delicate petals crushed beneath heavy rubber. The roses snapped, their stems breaking like fragile bones. Soil kicked up in a cruel spray, the bright colors of my sanctuary reduced to wreckage in an instant. I shot to my feet, fists clenched, heart hammering against my ribs. The truck never even slowed. Rick just kept going, windows down, laughter spilling into the morning air as if it were all a joke. And then I saw her. Clarissa stood on her porch, a glass of tea in her hand, watching. Smirking. Just like she used to when she wanted me to know she had won. Something in me snapped. I strode across the street, dirt still clinging to my knees, my pulse roaring in my ears. Hey, I called, my voice tight with anger. Rick stepped out of the truck, slow and smug, wiping his hands on his jeans like he'd just put in a hard day's work. Clarissa didn't move, just sipped her tea, eyes gleaming with amusement. You mind keeping your truck off my land? I forced my voice to stay steady. Rick smirked. Too many teeth. What's the big deal, dude? It's just some flowers. My blood burned. It's my garden. I've spent years on it. You don't get to roll over it like it's nothing. He laughed, sharp and dismissive, then turned to Clarissa as if I were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. She tilted her head, her lips curling into a familiar, cruel smile. Oh, Marcus, loosen up. Men will be men. She took a slow sip. Rick's a real man. Not like some other folks. The words cut like they always had. A real man. The same taunt she had thrown at me during the divorce, a cheap weapon designed to wound. Rick chuckled, leaning against his truck. Maybe you should pick a tougher hobby, friend. Flowers? That's cute. I said nothing. Just turned and walked back to my house, my mouth a firm, unyielding line. Their laughter followed me, curling around my spine like barbed wire. Inside, I pressed my back against the door, my breath coming sharp and fast. I glanced out the window, at the devastation in my yard. Flowers crushed, stems broken, tire tracks slashed through the soil like scars. I had spent years tending that garden, building something gentle, something good. And in a single morning, they had torn it apart. I looked toward their house, toward that truck, toward the smug, watching faces. and something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about flowers anymore. They wanted to push me? Fine. I'd push back. Not with fists. Not with shouting. I wasn't Rick. But I would find my way. As I stood there, staring at the ruins of my sanctuary, one thing became clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I leaned forward, barely breathing, my eyes fixed through the slats of the blinds as Rick's hulking truck prowled down the cul-de-sac. He didn't even pretend to be careful, swinging wide as always, his tires veering toward my yard like it was his personal playground. But this time I was ready. The moment his front tires crossed the invisible threshold, striking the exact spot where I had buried the mat, it happened. Zap! A sharp crackle split the night air, low but unmistakable. The truck jerked as if it had hit an unseen wall, and a high-pitched yelp, nothing like Rick's usual gruff bravado, escaped into the darkness. He barely had time to register what had happened before the sprinklers kicked in. Perfectly aimed, they blasted ice-cold water straight into his open windows, drenching the leather seats, the dashboard, him. A furious string of curses rang out, tangled with the spluttering sound of a man caught completely off guard. But before he could regain control, the real spectacle began. From across the yard, a monstrous, guttural scream tore through the night. Cal's speaker, hidden perfectly, let loose a hellish roar, a sound so deep and unnatural it sent a shudder even through me. The houses trembled with its echo, the windows in my own home rattling with the force of it. Rick's reaction was instant. The truck veered violently, tires spinning in the damp soil, desperate to escape whatever nightmare had just been unleashed. Mud splattered in wide arcs, spraying across the ruined grass. He was yelling now, panicked and confused, his voice barely audible over the chaos. And then movement at their house. Clarissa. She staggered onto the porch, wrapped in a thin robe, her hair a tangled mess from sleep. She had heard the commotion, no doubt assuming Rick had gotten himself into trouble again. Barefoot, she rushed forward, straight onto the same mat. Zap! Her shriek cut through the night, wild and shrill, her body jerking as she stumbled back like she had stepped onto live wires. Rick! What the hell is this? She screamed, voice cracking. She barely had time to process what had happened before the sprinklers turned their merciless attention to her, drenching her in icy bursts. Her robe clung to her, water dripping from her hair as she spun, bewildered, caught in a storm she had never expected. I couldn't stay inside anymore. Pulling on my jacket, I stepped out onto my porch, deliberately slow, like I had just been woken by the commotion and was merely a curious neighbor checking on the disturbance. The scene before me was even better than I had imagined. Rick was half out of his truck, one leg sunk deep into the mud, water pouring from his buzzed head, his shirt plastered to his chest. Clarissa stood shivering in the grass, her arms wrapped around herself, her expression caught somewhere between fury and disbelief. For the first time, she didn't look so smug. The speaker had gone silent, set on a timer, but the sprinklers still hissed, sending out intermittent sprays, adding to the discomfort of the wrecked duo standing before me. I crossed my arms, leaning against the porch railing, letting the silence settle for a moment before speaking. Pros, I muttered, my voice neutral, as if I were merely observing an unfortunate accident. Rick snapped his head toward me, his face red with fury, but for a moment he was too busy yanking his boot free from the mud to reply. Clarissa, however, was quicker. She stomped forward, her soaked robe dragging against her legs, water dripping from her chin as she pointed a trembling finger at me. What did you do, Marcus? She hissed. This is absurd. We're calling the police. I had been waiting for that. Please do, I said, meeting her glare without hesitation. I have weeks of surveillance footage of you two damaging my property. I'm sure the cops would love to see it. Her mouth opened, then shut. I could practically hear the wheels turning in her head, calculating the risk. Rick finally freed himself with an angry grunt, stomping toward me with fists clenched, his chest puffed out like he was trying to reclaim whatever shred of dominance he had left. You think you're smart, huh? He growled, water still dripping down his face. Setting up some little booby trap? You're pathetic. I shrugged, unbothered. I think it's pretty smart, actually. Maybe next time, you should try staying on your own side of the street. Rick took a step closer, but before he could do anything, Clarissa grabbed his arm, her grip tight. Rick, don't, she snapped, her voice low, sharp. He's not worth it. Her anger had shifted, no longer just at me, but at the situation, at the fact that, for once, they weren't the ones in control. She stood there, soaked and seething, but no longer victorious. Rick muttered something under his breath, no doubt some colorful curse, before turning back toward his truck, kicking at the mud like it had personally offended him. Clarissa lingered for a moment longer, shooting me one last venomous glare before following, her wet slippers making miserable squishing sounds with every step. "This isn't over," she called over her shoulder, but there was something hollow in her voice, like she wasn't so sure anymore. I watched them retreat, their truck limping back up the driveway, dragging behind it a trail of water, mud, and quiet humiliation. For a long moment, I simply stood there, letting the night settle around me. The sprinklers finally shut off, leaving only the faint sound of dripping water and the churned-up mess of my yard. The grass was wrecked, the mud thick with tire tracks, but I didn't care. Because this wasn't about the garden anymore.